I'm sure many of you are aware that certain recent events have been couched in ways I'm pretty certain are fairly far from reasonable. I'm talking specifically about the events that have occurred in the U.S. Capitol in recent days, and today is about discussing what happened as far as I've heard to this point and what it means. Hello and welcome to the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host, I'm Kurt. It is Wednesday, the 20th of January of 2021. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, on the podcast, or on YouTube. And today's subject is sedition and insurrection. I wanted to start by defining those terms. I wanted to start by first defining sedition. And I'm going to, I used a search from DuckDuckGo to get the definition that I'm using. And I wanted to go ahead and put that up on the screen. Let me go ahead and do that now. And for those of you that are on the podcast, fear not, I am going to read. The definition is conduct or language inciting rebellion against the authority of a state, insurrection, rebellion. A facetious commotion in a state, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch more that you can get off of the screen. And I'm going to leave it up for a second so that you can have a moment to look at that and see what the other potential definitions are. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take that down now. Remember that you can always pause the video if you want to so that you can see it going back if you need to do that. But what we're going to do now is discuss the meaning of the term insurrection, right? That's the next one that we're going to talk about. So again, I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen. Here I go. And I'm going to go ahead yet again and read it for those on the podcast so you're not missing out. Again, this is from a DuckDuckGo search. Insurrection is the act or instance of open revolt against civil authority or a constituted government, a rising up, uprising, the act of rising up against civil authority, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to leave it up again for a second so that you can look at it. But I just wanted to say that the whole point of these definitions is to talk about what actually happened in the recent period in the Capitol where a bunch of people came out, some of them Trump supporters, some of them not, and largely just demonstrated against things and demonstrated for things that they thought should, demonstrated against things they thought were happening and demonstrated for things that they thought should be happening, and where a very few actually took action beyond that. And again, the number was small, and I'm not even going to get into whether they were leftists or rightists. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. Those people may very well suffer the consequences of the actions that they're currently, quote, guilty of. But by any means, I don't think that anybody in their right mind would actually say that these people were either seditious or insurrectionists. They just weren't. I don't think most of them, as a couple of folks have pointed out, had any real plans at all. And I think there were a few who thought maybe that they were going to overthrow the government or whatever, but either they were totally mistaken in the number of people who were in support of such an idea, or they were just kind of out in the weeds a little bit. But so for those people, I suppose you could find them guilty of sedition or insurrection. But let me point something out here, because there's actually some important stuff to consider. Anybody who's watched a movie, say, for example, even 3 or 4 or 5 hours, like The Last Samurai, or the Lord of the Rings series, and for that matter, even read a book like War and Peace, is aware that one of the things that happens in the making, particularly of movies, one of the movie magic moments, is the concept of encapsulation, where they take a very long period and they shrink it down into a very short period for the sake of not using up all of the time of the movie in one scene, right? The American Revolution, it's been pointed out, was not something that happened in a year. You can be pretty sure that that's pretty true for the Civil War as well, and for many other conflicts that have occurred, including World War II, right? It was more than a year. It was more than 2 years, right? So the idea that you can really in a one-to-one time frame put that on film is interesting, but what you would have to do is literally continue to do that for a huge amount of time, and considering a lot of times the area and the time and so forth that these things occupied over the course of time, it would be virtually impossible to capture everything. Here's the reality, though. The reality is, as I've said, these things didn't happen in a minute or an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours. And this is one of the reasons, one of my primary arguments against the sedition or insurrection idea about what happened in the Capitol recently. Totally besides the intent of the people who are involved, which for the most part seemed to be peaceful protest and not much else. But the thing is, if you look at what happened between the British and the Americans, for example, in the Revolutionary War in the United States, you will see that this was not something that happened in a day or a week or a month. It happened over a pretty long period of time with prolonged battles, even in certain instances, right, where people held areas and other people tried to gain access to them and either failed or succeeded in doing so. But so the point is, when you talk about something like sedition or something like insurrection, and you talk about a hot-headed moment that somebody spends doing something, it's not impossible that that can be sedition or insurrection, but it's highly unlikely. Just because the person, if they didn't plan anything and didn't follow through and didn't carry through for days and days and days or weeks and weeks and weeks, then the chances are really good that they weren't intending to actually unseat or openly rebel against the government as such. And you have to remember that one of the strong underlying principles of America is that we have the ability to protest, to redress the government, to petition the government for redress of grievances, and so many other things. And the point is that if you don't have people with guns marching on the Capitol or truly trying to hurt people, then you don't have much of a problem to begin with. There's just not much of a problem to begin with. But if you add to this idea, the idea that, like I say, what we're talking about was something that occurred over what, maybe 5 hours, 10 hours at the very most, the chances are pretty good that no seditious or insurrectionist activities really particularly were even able to occur in the time frame. And further, if it were possible that such a thing had happened, they probably could have pretty easily been dissolved, right? Somebody could have come in, tromped in, and just taken various kinds of crowd control and dispersal activities in put them in place and made it so that a lot of those things just went away. They just didn't happen at all. So I guess what I'm saying is this. It's really more than a little weak and a little ridiculous for people to say that what happened in the Capitol, for the most part, for certain, and really at all, was seditious or insurrectionist. It's really just not a very strong thing to say. You really can't make that argument and make it well. I'm sorry, you just can't. By the same well, in fact, in a sense, I think you could sort of make the argument that there were seditious and insurrectionist activities that occurred in more local situations in the BLM and Antifa protests that occurred in the summertime. Even so, I think that I would have a hard time couching those largely as seditious or insurrectionist. I don't believe they were. That's not what they were trying to do as far as I'm able to tell. So even those, which were a great deal more violent and caused a lot more harm and damage, even those were really not seditious or insurrectionist in nature. And so this is what I guess I'm saying is, if you're not looking at the BLM stuff and the Antifa stuff and going, oh, that was seditious, oh, that was insurrectionist, the only thing that might cause you to think about what happened recently in the Capitol to be more so is that it was in the Capitol. And the truth of the matter is, for most of the people that were involved in that, they didn't try to breach any part of government. All they did was stayed outside and said, look, this is how we feel and you guys are wrong. And that's basically the whole of it. So that's kind of the summation for today is, as far as I'm concerned, I haven't seen in recent days anything that amounts to sedition or insurrection. And that's regardless of whether it's on the right or the left, whether it's BLM, whether it's Antifa, whether it's people on the right, Trump supporters and so forth. And I'll just tell you right now that that doesn't mean I agree with everything, and that doesn't mean no criminal activity has occurred, but I don't believe sedition and insurrection are what we're talking about here. Okay, again, today is Wednesday, the 20th of January of 2021, and I'm going to try and get another daily summation out on the 21st. That would be tomorrow. As usual, I hope that your day is a good one. We are in the middle of the week. Even if you did take Monday off, we're in the middle of the week for all intents and purposes, the work week, and before too long, we'll be sliding towards the end. I'm hoping that you're having a good week so far, that things haven't been terribly bad for you, and I hope also that I will see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Wednesday, the 20th of January of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that, and you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.